Farmer Remy Blackwood stood motionless at the edge of his collapsed irrigation dam, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The earthen structure that had served his Oregon vineyard for over 30 years had finally given way to unprecedented winter flooding the night before. But it wasn't the destruction of the vital water reservoir that held him paralyzed. It was what lay revealed in the exposed hillside beneath it. A massive steel door, partially visible through the mud, its surface covered in faded military markings, unlike anything he'd ever seen on his property. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 62-year-old vineyard owner had inherited this land from his uncle 15 years ago, transforming what had once been a struggling cattle operation into a thriving boutique winery. He knew every acre of the rolling Willamette Valley property, or at least he thought he did. The Pacific Northwest wasn't known for hidden military installations or mysterious underground bunkers, yet here was something that defied explanation, something that had been silently waiting beneath his prized Pinot Noir grapes. For who knows how long? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Blackwood Vineyard had become a modest success story. In Oregon's competitive wine country, Remy had poured his life savings and countless hours of labor into nurturing the perfect soil conditions and microclimate for his award-winning Pinot Noir grapes. The irrigation dam that had stood at the north end of the property was crucial to the vineyard's survival during the increasingly dry Oregon summers. Every morning for years, Remy would walk past the dam on his daily inspection tour, checking water levels and planning the day's work, never suspecting what lay beneath its foundation. The devastating storm that had torn through the region the previous night had been unprecedented, with rainfall amounts breaking century-old records. Local meteorologists had called it a 1,000-year flood event, and as Remy surveyed the damage in the grey morning light, he realized that nature's destruction had uncovered something far more significant than broken irrigation infrastructure. The metal doorway was unlike anything that belonged on a vineyard. Its surface was weathered but intact despite being buried for what must have been decades. The markings that covered it appeared to be military designation codes, but they weren't like any military insignia Remy had ever encountered during his brief service in the Army Corps of Engineers. They seemed to be purposely obscured, as if whoever had constructed this entrance had wanted it to remain anonymous even if discovered. The door itself was massive, standing at least 8 feet tall, and what was visible of its frame suggested it extended even deeper into the hillside. As Remy cautiously approached the structure, his boots sinking into the mud, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was violating something classified. The morning air was unusually still, and the familiar sounds of his vineyard, the rustle of grape leaves, the distant rumble of tractors, the chattering of starlings, seemed muted, as if the very atmosphere around the doorway was different somehow. He reached out tentatively to touch the metal surface, half expecting it to be an illusion that would disappear at his touch, but his fingers met cold, solid steel. The surface was rough with oxidation, but still structurally sound, and as his hand moved across the strange markings, he could have sworn he felt a slight vibration, a subtle hum that seemed to resonate through his fingertips. Remy's mind raced with questions. How long had this been here? What was its purpose? Who had built it? The location made no sense. The nearest military base was over 100 miles away, and this didn't match any civilian construction he'd ever encountered. The engineering was too specific, too purposeful for anything that should exist in this region's agricultural past. He pulled out his smartphone to take pictures, but to his surprise, the screen displayed only static before going completely dark. He tried to restart it, but nothing happened. The device was dead, despite having been fully charged when he left the house a half-hour earlier. A chill ran down his spine as he realized this might not be a coincidence. As the morning fog began to lift, casting long shadows across the damaged vineyard, Remy made a decision. He couldn't keep this to himself. Something this significant needed to be properly investigated, but he also knew that once word got out, his quiet life would never be the same. Whatever this doorway led to, whatever secrets it held, they were about to change everything. He just didn't realize how much. The Blackwood vineyard had been struggling long before the mysterious doorway appeared. Remy's thoughts drifted to the mounting challenges as he stood before the strange entrance. The past 3 years had been particularly difficult. Climate change had brought increasingly erratic weather patterns to the Willamette Valley. Last summer's unprecedented heat dome had scorched nearly 20% of his crop, and rising production costs had forced him to take out a second mortgage just to keep operations going. The bank had been pressuring him about loan payments, and he'd already had to sell off 10 acres of undeveloped land just to stay afloat. The irrigation dam's collapse was just the latest in a string of setbacks. He'd been planning to reinforce it this spring, but the funds just weren't there. Now, as he stared at the otherworldly doorway amid the dam's ruins, the destruction seemed almost meaningful, as if fate had intervened to reveal this secret at precisely this moment. Remy's wife Diana had passed away 4 years ago after a prolonged battle with lymphoma, leaving him to manage the vineyard alone. Their only son, Sam, had moved to Seattle for a position with a tech company, making it clear he had no interest in carrying on the family's agricultural tradition. The thought of being the last Blackwood to work this land weighed heavily on Remy's mind. His uncle had entrusted this property to him with such hope and pride, and now it seemed their legacy might end with him. Last month, he'd received an offer from Westland Agribusiness, a corporation buying up struggling vineyards throughout the region to convert them into large-scale commercial operations. The number they'd quoted was substantial enough to pay off all his debts and still leave him comfortable for retirement. He'd been giving it serious consideration, despite the knot it created in his stomach. The thought of watching his family's vineyard being transformed into an industrial-scale operation felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. But now, as he studied the mysterious doorway, those immediate concerns seemed somehow distant. The craftsmanship of the structure was remarkable. The door frame set into the hillside with precision engineering that had withstood decades of Oregon's wet climate without apparent deterioration. The markings, which he'd initially thought might be simple identification codes, clearly formed some kind of systematic classification that suggested this was no ordinary fallout shelter from the Cold War era. Remy's uncle had occasionally mentioned rumors about the property's history during the Cold War era. Tales circulated in the valley about government land acquisitions in the 1950s, but nothing in those stories had ever suggested anything like this. The few odd items they'd occasionally found while working the land, old shell casings, the occasional piece of unusual metal debris, had seemed like trivial anomalies. Nothing compared to the sophisticated engineering this doorway represented. The vibration he'd felt earlier seemed to be growing stronger, or perhaps he was just becoming more attuned to it. It reminded him of standing near the vineyard's industrial wine refrigeration units, but instead of being loud and jarring, this sensation was subtle, almost rhythmic. He noticed that the air around the doorway felt different too, slightly cooler than the surrounding morning dampness, with a faint metallic taste that reminded him of standing near electrical equipment. His smartphone wasn't the only piece of technology acting strangely. The digital soil moisture meter he'd brought to assess the flood damage had stopped working, despite having fresh batteries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His tractor, parked about 50 yards away, had refused to start when he'd attempted to move some of the collapsed earth. These anomalies added another layer of mystery to the already inexplicable situation. As Remy contemplated his next move, he thought about his uncle's favorite saying, "The land remembers what people forget." The old man had repeated those words whenever they discovered something unexpected while working the soil. An arrowhead, an old coin, the foundation stones of a long-gone structure. Even in the most thoroughly documented places, the earth had a way of preserving secrets. Now, standing before this impossible discovery, those words took on a new meaning. The sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning fog, and Remy knew he needed to make a decision. His first instinct was to contact his friend Paul Matthews at the County Historical Society. Paul had connections with archaeologists at Portland State University who might be able to make sense of this. But something held him back. The moment he made that call, this discovery would become public knowledge. His quiet vineyard would be transformed into a research site swarming with government officials, academics, and probably military personnel too. The peace he'd fought, so hard to preserve, would vanish overnight. Moreover, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeply personal about this discovery. For 15 years, he had walked over this spot countless times, never knowing what lay beneath his feet. Now, at perhaps the lowest point in the vineyard's history, this door had revealed itself. That couldn't be coincidence. Remy spent the next few hours carefully clearing mud and debris from around the doorway, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns. Each shovelful of earth he removed revealed more of the structure's intricate details. The door itself was set into what appeared to be a larger concrete housing with steel reinforcement, with the mysterious markings becoming more concentrated. Near its center, what had initially looked like random military identifiers now seemed to form a pattern, with a sequence of numbers and letters repeated at regular intervals around the perimeter. As he worked, the strange electromagnetic disturbances continued. His wristwatch had stopped at precisely 8:37, the same time he'd first touched the door's surface. The compass he'd brought from his truck spun erratically when held near the structure, and his backup phone showed no signal despite the vineyard normally having decent coverage. These anomalies only added to his growing sense that he was dealing with something far beyond ordinary military construction. The decision weighing on Remy's mind wasn't just about who to tell. It was about whether to attempt opening the door himself. Common sense told him to wait for experts, to let the proper authorities handle whatever this was. But there was something else, an almost magnetic pull that made him feel this discovery was meant specifically for him. The timing was too perfect, the location too personal. This wasn't just some random historical artifact. This was something that had been waiting beneath his family's vineyard for decades. He thought about Diana. She had always been the practical one, the voice of reason that balanced his occasional impulsive tendencies. "Think it through, Rem," she would say whenever he faced a difficult decision. "Look at it from all angles." He could almost hear her voice now, urging caution. Yet he couldn't help wondering if she would have felt the same inexplicable connection to this discovery that he did. The more he cleared away the debris, the more convinced he became that this wasn't any known type of military installation. The precision of the engineering exceeded anything he'd seen during his time in the army. The edges were perfectly sealed against moisture, the surfaces impossibly preserved despite decades underground. Even more strange, the entire structure seemed to maintain a constant temperature regardless of the warming day around it. When he pressed his palm against it, the metal felt neither cold nor warm. It was as if it existed in its own environmental bubble. By mid-afternoon, Remy had exposed enough of the doorway to see that it was part of a larger, underground complex. The concrete housing extended outward in both directions, disappearing into the hillside beneath his vineyard. This wasn't just a door, it was an entrance to something much more extensive. The implications made his head spin. How much of his property was sitting atop whatever this structure was? What else might be hidden beneath the rolling vineyard rows where his Pinot Noir grapes grew? As he sat on a fallen tree trunk, drinking water from his canteen, Remy noticed something he hadn't seen before. The central point where the coded markings converged, now cleaned of mud and debris, had a slight indentation. It was subtle, but in the afternoon light, he could see it was perfectly circular, about the size of a half-dollar coin. The surrounding symbols seemed to radiate outward from this point, like spokes in a wheel. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, where he kept his uncle's old challenge coin. It had been given to his uncle for some unspecified service during the Korean War, and he had passed it to Remy along with the vineyard. The coin hadn't left Remy's pocket since his uncle's funeral. Now, looking at the circular indentation in the door, he couldn't help but notice that the coin was exactly the same size. The implications of what he was considering made him pause. If he was wrong, if this was just his imagination making connections that weren't there, he could potentially damage an invaluable historical artifact. He could destroy evidence that might help explain what this structure was and who had built it. The responsible thing would be to wait, to call in experts who could properly document and study everything before any attempts were made to open the door. But deep down, Remy knew he wasn't going to wait. This was his land, his family's legacy, and somehow he felt certain this discovery was meant for him. Whatever lay beyond that door had chosen this moment to reveal itself, just when he needed it most. The failing vineyard, the pressure to sell, his son's disinterest in continuing the family tradition. It all seemed connected to this moment of decision. With trembling fingers, Remy removed his uncle's challenge coin from his pocket. The metal disc caught the afternoon sun, its embossed surface showing the faded insignia of a unit he'd never been able to identify. His uncle had been tight-lipped about his military service, saying only that he'd helped with special projects during the Korean War era. The coin bore no standard military markings, just a series of numbers and an unusual geometric symbol that resembled a stylized compass rose. He stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, and raised the coin to the central indentation. The moment the metal disc touched the door, Remy felt a subtle change in the air around him. The constant humming that had been emanating from the structure shifted in pitch, becoming slightly higher, more resonant. The coin fit perfectly into the circular depression, as if it had been designed specifically for this purpose. For a moment, nothing else happened, and Remy felt a flash of disappointment. Then he noticed the markings beginning to change, starting from the center and moving. Outward in concentric circles, the faded symbols began to emit a faint amber luminescence. The light pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, the symbols seemed to shift and reorganize themselves. The temperature around the door dropped noticeably, creating wisps of condensation as the cool air met the warm afternoon sun. The vibration in the ground intensified, and Remy could feel it resonating through his boots. Acting on instinct, he turned the coin clockwise, just as one would a key. The resistance was slight at first, but after about a quarter turn, he felt a distinct click. The humming suddenly increased in volume, and the amber light grew brighter. The symbols were moving faster now, rotating in alternating circles around the coin. The air seemed to crackle with static electricity, making the hair on his arms stand on end. Then, with a sound like compressed air being released from a pressure chamber, a line appeared down the center of the door. It widened slowly, revealing darkness beyond. Cool air rushed out, carrying with it an odd scent, not musty as one would expect from an underground chamber, but clean and slightly chemical, like the air in a hospital. The door continued to open. Outward, moving with unexpected smoothness, despite its massive size and apparent weight. Remy stepped back, his heart racing. The opening revealed a corridor that stretched downward at a gentle angle, disappearing into darkness. The walls appeared to be made of polished concrete, but they emitted a soft, ambient light that seemed to come from within the material itself. The floor was perfectly level, with no signs of age or degradation. It looked as pristine as if it had been constructed yesterday, despite having been sealed beneath his vineyard for decades. Gathering his courage, Remy retrieved a powerful LED flashlight from his truck. He tested it before approaching the doorway, relieved to find it still worked despite the other electronic disruptions around the site. The beam cut through the darkness of the corridor, revealing that it extended at least 50 feet before curving gently to the right. The ceiling was high enough that he couldn't quite make it out, and the walls were covered in more of the strange symbols, though these weren't glowing like those on the door. Before venturing inside, Remy took several photos with his old digital camera, the one piece of technology that seemed unaffected by whatever force was interfering with his other devices. He carefully documented the doorway, the symbols, and the entrance to the corridor. If anything happened to him, he wanted there to be evidence of what he'd found. He also scribbled a quick note in his pocket notebook describing the discovery and how he'd opened the door, just in case. The logical part of his mind was screaming at him to stop, to wait for experts, to not venture alone into this impossible structure. But there was another part of him, perhaps the same part that had helped him persevere through the hardest years after Diana's death, that urged him forward. This wasn't just curiosity, it was a deep, almost primal certainty that he needed to see what lay beyond that curve in the corridor. Taking a deep breath, Remy stepped through the doorway. The air inside was cool but not cold, and surprisingly fresh. His footsteps echoed slightly, suggesting a significant open space beyond. The ambient light from the walls created an otherworldly atmosphere, making shadows dance and shift as he moved. The symbols continued their gentle pulsing, and he noticed that they seemed to respond to his presence, glowing slightly brighter as he passed. About 30 feet in, Remy heard a sound behind him. He turned just in time to see the massive door slowly swinging closed. His heart jumped into his throat, but before he could run back, he noticed something strange. The challenge coin remained in place in the center of the door, still visible from this side. Somehow he knew this meant he could open the door again when needed. This wasn't a trap, it was an invitation. With the door closed, the corridor took on a different character. The ambient light from the walls grew stronger, and the symbols pulsing became more pronounced. The humming that had been present since he first discovered the doorway was now more melodic, almost like music played at the edge of hearing. Despite the strangeness of his situation, Remy felt an overwhelming sense of rightness, as if he was exactly where he needed to be. As he continued down the gently sloping corridor, his initial certainty began to waver. The passage had been curving steadily to the right for what seemed like several hundred feet, and he realized he must be well beyond the boundaries of his irrigation dam by now. The ambient light from the walls cast everything in an ethereal amber glow, making it difficult to judge distances accurately. His flashlight beam seemed to be growing weaker, though he'd just put in fresh batteries that morning. The silence was becoming oppressive. Apart from his footsteps and the faint musical humming of the walls, there was no sound at all, no dripping, water, no distant echoes, none of the things you'd expect in an underground structure. The air remained surprisingly fresh, suggesting some kind of ventilation system, but he couldn't feel any air movement. It was as if the entire complex existed in a perfect state of preservation, untouched by time or decay. Every few yards, Remy encountered branching corridors leading off in different directions. He stuck to the main passage, marking his path with small pieces of orange surveyor's tape he kept in his pocket, a habit from his days, helping his uncle map the original vineyard plots. But even this simple precaution began to feel inadequate as the complexity of the underground network became apparent. Some passages sloped downward more steeply, others remained level, and a few even seemed to angle upward. After what must have been 20 minutes of walking, doubt began to creep in. What if he couldn't find his way back? What if the door wouldn't open from this side, despite his earlier confidence about the challenge coin? His family would have no idea where to look for him. He hadn't told anyone about his discovery. The Westland agribusiness representatives weren't due for another week, and his son Sam rarely called more than once a month. He could disappear down here, and it might be weeks before anyone realized he was missing. The symbols on the walls continued their hypnotic pulsing, but now Remy noticed they were changing subtly as he progressed deeper into the complex. New patterns emerged, more complex arrangements that seemed to tell a story he couldn't quite grasp. Occasionally, he'd come across larger sections where the symbols formed elaborate diagrams across the ceiling and walls. These images seemed to depict technical schematics and what looked like astronomical charts, but something about them felt wrong. The proportions were off, and some of the shapes were impossible to reconcile with any conventional engineering. He knew. His flashlight was definitely growing dimmer now, despite the fresh batteries. The beam barely reached half as far as it had when he entered, and the light had taken on a strange, reddish tinge. Even more unsettling, his digital camera had stopped working entirely. The screen remained black, though he could feel it vibrating slightly when he pressed the power button. The last few photos he'd taken showed odd distortions, streaks of light and color that hadn't been visible to his naked eye. The temperature was dropping too, gradually but noticeably. Remy zipped his jacket tighter around himself, wishing he'd brought more supplies. He'd been so caught up in the excitement of discovery that he hadn't properly prepared for an extended underground expedition. His water bottle was half empty, and the granola bar he'd eaten at lunch felt like a distant memory. The rational part of his mind urged him to turn back, to return with proper equipment and maybe some help, but just as he was about to heed that inner voice of caution, he noticed something different about the passage ahead. The corridor widened significantly, and the ceiling rose until it disappeared into darkness above. The symbols on the walls here were different, larger, more elaborate, and pulsing with a deeper, more intense amber light. The humming that had accompanied him throughout. His journey changed pitch, becoming lower and more resonant. Most intriguingly, there was a change in the air itself. The chemical smell that had been present since he entered was stronger here, and he could feel a definite current of air moving past him. Something about it reminded him of the sterile atmosphere of a laboratory. His skin tingled, and the small hairs on the back of his neck stood up. 20 yards ahead, the corridor opened into what appeared to be a vast chamber. The ambient light from the walls wasn't strong enough to illuminate its full extent, but he could see massive metal shelving units rising into the darkness, their surfaces gleaming dully in the low light. The floor changed from polished concrete to what looked like some kind of specialized composite material, its surface etched with a grid pattern similar to the one he'd seen around the entrance door. Remy stood at the threshold of this chamber, torn between fear and fascination. Everything he'd seen so far defied explanation, but this room promised answers, or at least bigger questions. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that somewhere in the darkness ahead, something was awaiting his arrival. The thought wasn't exactly threatening, but it filled him with a profound sense of unease. Whatever lay ahead would change everything. He was certain of that much. As Remy took his first steps into the vast chamber, His flashlight finally gave out completely. The sudden loss of its reassuring beam left him momentarily paralyzed, surrounded only by the ethereal amber glow from the walls and shelving units. His heart pounded in his chest as the darkness seemed to press in around him. The humming that had been his constant companion grew louder, more insistent, and the air became charged with what felt like static electricity. Then, without warning, ceiling lights began to activate in sequence, row by row, illuminating the chamber with a harsh fluorescent glare that made him squint after the long period in low light. As his eyes adjusted, Remy found himself standing in what appeared to be an enormous storage facility. Metal shelving units stretched in all directions, rising nearly 30 feet toward the ceiling and extending beyond where he could see. Each unit was filled with carefully catalogued containers, some metal, some appearing to be made of a material he couldn't identify. Each container bore markings similar to those on the walls, along with what looked like a classification system of numbers and letters. The scale was staggering. This single room could have housed his entire farmhouse with space to spare. The floor's grid pattern, now fully visible, appeared to be some kind of positioning system, with alphanumeric designations at regular intervals. This wasn't just storage. It was a precisely organized archive of something. Moving cautiously between the towering shelves, Remy approached one of the containers that had been placed at eye level. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, made of a dull, silvery metal with no visible seams or openings. The label contained a series of numbers, followed by what appeared to be a date, 07-19-1947. Next to the date was a location designation he recognized immediately, Roswell. NMA chill ran down his spine. Everyone knew the stories about Roswell, the supposed UFO crash, the government cover-up, the decades of conspiracy theories. He'd never put much stock in them himself, but seeing that name here, in this impossible underground facility, made him question everything. The container next to it bore another familiar location. Trinity Site, NM, 07-16-1945. The date of the first atomic bomb test. Another was labeled Groom Lake, NV, 09-03-1955. Area 51. Remy's mind reeled as he moved down the row, reading more labels. Some referenced places he recognized: Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Los Alamos, while others mentioned locations he'd never heard of. Some containers had additional markings in red, bearing words like unstable or biohazard or, most unsettlingly, non-terrestrial. With shaking hands, he reached for the container labeled Roswell. Despite its size, it was surprisingly light, as if it contained nothing at all. There were no obvious latches or opening mechanisms, just the seamless metal surface with its ominous label. As his fingers traced the edges, searching for a way to open it, the container suddenly responded to his touch. A previously invisible seam appeared around the top, and with a soft hiss of escaping air, the lid lifted slightly. Remy hesitated, wondering if he should proceed. Whatever was inside had been sealed away for decades, possibly for good reason. Curiosity overcame caution. He lifted the lid completely and found himself staring at a small, oddly shaped piece of metal nestled in a custom-fitted foam interior. The object was about the size of his palm, with an iridescent surface that seemed to shift colors as he looked at it. Despite its alien appearance, it somehow reminded him of a component from a circuit board, though unlike any technology he'd ever seen. Next to it was a small paper card, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved in the controlled environment of the container. On it was typed a brief description: fragment recovered from unidentified craft, material composition unknown, exhibits unusual electromagnetic properties and resistance to all conventional analysis methods. appears to absorb and redirect energy from surrounding environment. Handle with extreme caution. Remy stared at the object, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. If this was real, if even a fraction of what this facility contained was authentic, then he had stumbled upon perhaps the greatest collection of classified material in American history. A secret archive of the unexplained, the covered up, the deliberately forgotten, and somehow his uncle's challenge coin had been the key to accessing it all. Carefully, Remy returned the strange metal fragment to its container and sealed it shut. The implications of what he was seeing were overwhelming. If this single object was genuine, then what else might this facility contain? What other secrets had been hidden beneath his vineyard all these years? More pressing, however, was the question of his uncle's involvement. The challenge coin in the door wasn't a coincidence. Somehow, his uncle had been connected to this place. Perhaps he'd even helped build it. The thought that his quiet, unassuming relative had been involved in something of this magnitude was difficult to process. Moving deeper into the storage area, Remy began to notice a pattern to the organization. The shelving units seemed to be arranged chronologically, with the earliest dates from the 1940s near the entrance, progressing to more recent years as he moved further in. Some sections were marked with different colored labels: red for hazardous materials, blue for technology, green for biological samples, and yellow for what was ominously labeled simply as anomalous. It was the yellow section that drew his attention. These containers were different, constructed of what looked like thick glass rather than metal, allowing him to see their contents without opening them. Inside one was what appeared to be a small meteorite, but it was floating, suspended in the center of the container without touching any side. Another held what looked like an ordinary pocket watch, except its hands were moving counterclockwise at varying speeds. A third contained what Remy initially mistook for a piece of obsidian until he looked closer. The black, glassy object seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a shadow that appeared deeper than should be possible. The label read, "Recovered Black Forest, Germany, 03/12/1952. Anomalous properties, spatial distortion, gravitational inconsistency, observer effect. Caution, extended viewing not recommended." He quickly looked away, suddenly uncomfortable, with the way the object seemed to pull at his vision. Moving on, he found himself in a section with more recent dates, the 1980s and 1990s. Here, the containers were larger, some the size of filing cabinets, others as large as refrigerators. Many bore military markings and what appeared to be project code names: Stargate, Looking Glass, Phoenix. One cabinet-sized container caught his eye. Unlike the others, it bore a familiar name: Blackwood Observation Site, Willamette Valley, or 1974-1988. His family name. On his property, the container had a conventional latch system rather than the seamless design of the others. With trembling fingers, Remy opened it to find dozens of carefully organized file folders, each containing what appeared to be observation logs, photographs, and technical readings. Flipping through them, he saw aerial photographs of his vineyard, from before he owned it, when it was still his uncle's cattle ranch. Several photos showed a strange light phenomenon over the North Ridge, exactly where the irrigation dam had been built. Others contained detailed readings of electromagnetic anomalies, temperature variations, and what was labeled as temporal inconsistencies. The observation notes described a persistent thin spot in what was referred to as the dimensional membrane. The final report, dated March 1988, recommended construction of a dampening structure over the anomaly site to stabilize and obscure the phenomenon from public observation. The recommended structure, an earth-filled dam that would serve the dual purpose of containment and providing useful irrigation for the agricultural cover operation. Remy sat heavily on a nearby storage crate, his mind reeling. The irrigation dam hadn't been built for water storage, or at least that hadn't been its primary purpose. It had been constructed to contain whatever strange phenomenon had been occurring on his property, and his uncle had been part of it all, not just aware of the underground facility, but actively involved in the cover-up. As he processed this revelation, Remy became aware of a subtle change in the ambient sound. The humming that had been present throughout the facility had shifted in tone and rhythm. The lights flickered momentarily, and he felt a slight vibration through the floor. Something was happening. Rising quickly, he gathered the most relevant files and tucked them inside his jacket. Whatever was occurring, he wanted evidence of what he'd discovered. As he closed the container, the lights flickered again, more pronounced. This time, and the humming grew louder. That's when he heard it, a new sound cutting through the background noise. Footsteps. Someone else was in the facility. Remy ducked behind a tall shelving unit, his heart pounding. The footsteps were unhurried, methodical, as if whoever was approaching knew exactly where they were going. From his hiding place, he caught glimpses of a figure moving between the shelves. A man in what appeared to be a tactical uniform, complete with sidearm. The stranger carried a handheld device that emitted a soft beeping sound, which intensified as he moved in Remy's direction. Some kind of tracker, Remy realized. Perhaps the facility had security measures he'd triggered, or maybe his presence had been detected from the moment he'd used the challenge coin to open the door. Either way, he was no longer alone, and the newcomer was clearly no ordinary security guard. As the figure drew closer, Remy caught a clearer view of him. A man, in his 50s, with close-cropped grey hair and the disciplined bearing of military personnel. The uniform bore no insignia or identification, just a simple black design with multiple pockets and what appeared to be body armor beneath. "Mr. Blackwood," the man called out, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "I know you're here. There's no need for concern. My name is Sonny Weathers. I was a colleague of your uncle's." Remy remained silent, unsure whether to trust this unexpected visitor. The man sighed audibly, then continued. "Robert knew this day might come. That's why he left you the coin. It was always meant to be a key, just one that wouldn't be used until it was truly needed." He paused, then added, "Your vineyard is failing, isn't it? Just like the ranch was failing when your uncle made his decision back in '74. That caught Remy's attention. How could this stranger know about his financial situation? And what decision had his uncle made? "We've been monitoring the dam for structural integrity for years," Sonny continued, moving slowly through the shelves. "We knew it was only a matter of time before it failed, especially with the climate shifts affecting the watershed. What we couldn't predict was whether you'd find the entrance, and if you did, whether you'd have the coin. Robert was optimistic that you would." He stopped, just one row away from Remy's hiding place. "You've seen enough to understand this. Isn't a conversation we should be having while you're hiding behind storage shelves. We have a lot to discuss, and not much time." The facility's systems detected an unauthorized access and initiated a security protocol. In about 20 minutes, certain containment measures will activate that you really don't want to be here. 4. Weighing his options, Remy realized he had little choice. If what the man said about containment measures was true, he needed to find a way out quickly. And if this Sonny Weathers really had worked with his uncle, he might provide answers to the questions that were now multiplying by the minute. Slowly, Remy stepped out from his hiding place. "How do I know I can trust you?" Sonny smiled slightly, lowering the tracking device. "You don't, but your uncle did, and he trusted you'd make the right call when the time came." He glanced at his watch. "Now, we should really be going. I can explain everything once we're clear of the facility, including why your uncle chose you to find this place and what he hoped you'd do with what you discovered here." "Follow me," Sonny said, turning toward a section of the facility Remy hadn't yet explored. There's an emergency exit system that bypasses the main entrance. We need to use that now that containment protocols are active. As they moved quickly through the labyrinthine storage area, the facility's ambient hum grew more intense, and the lights began to pulse in a rhythmic pattern. Remy clutched the files he'd taken from the Blackwood container inside his jacket, unwilling to leave behind the only tangible evidence of his discovery. "What exactly is this place?" Remy asked as they navigated between towering shelves filled with mysterious artifacts. "Officially, it doesn't exist," Sonny replied without slowing his pace. "Unofficially, it's called Repository Site 37, one of 12 similar facilities across the country. Each one was strategically positioned over naturally occurring anomalies that help mask their energy signatures from satellite detection." They reached a reinforced door at the far side of the storage chamber. Sonny placed his palm on a scanner beside it, then entered a complex code on a keypad. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in red. "Emergency lighting. The anomaly under your property was discovered in 1974 during routine aerial magnetic surveys by the USGS," Sonny continued as they hurried down the corridor. On paper, they were looking for mineral deposits. In reality, they were mapping these thin spots, places where the fabric between dimensions isn't quite as solid as it should be. The corridor sloped upward at a steep angle, eventually reaching another security door. As Sonny worked on opening it, the facility shuddered around them. The amber symbols on the walls were now pulsing rapidly, and the humming had transformed into a high-pitched whine that made Remy's teeth ache. "Your uncle was already operating the ranch when the anomaly was discovered," Sonny explained, as the doctor opened to reveal a small elevator. "The government approached him with a choice: sell the land to a shell corporation for a pittance or become part of the program. He chose cooperation." They stepped into the elevator, and Sonny inserted a key into a control panel. The doors closed, and Remy felt a surge of acceleration as they began to ascend rapidly. "My uncle was a simple cattle rancher," Remy protested. "How could he possibly be involved in whatever this is?" Sonny gave him a knowing look. "Robert Blackwood was many things, but simple wasn't one of them. Before buying that ranch, he was Dr. Robert Blackwood, physicist with top-secret clearance and specialized expertise in quantum field theory. He worked at Los Alamos during the early Cold War years." The elevator slowed to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal what appeared to be an ordinary tool shed. Farm implements hung on the walls, and a workbench covered in typical repair equipment stood against one side. Sonny moved to a corner, shifted aside some boxes, and revealed a hidden exit door. "Your uncle wanted a quieter life after what he witnessed during the weapons programs," Sonny continued as they stepped outside into the fading afternoon light. The ranch offered that, while still allowing him to serve as an on-site monitor for the anomaly. The repository was built beneath the property in '77, with your uncle serving as both security and primary researcher for the Oregon Containment Zone. They emerged on the far side of the North Ridge, about a quarter-mile from where the collapsed dam had revealed the main entrance. Remy could see emergency vehicles in the distance near his house. Apparently, someone had finally noticed the dam collapse and called it in. "We need to move quickly," Sonny said, guiding Remy toward a nondescript SUV parked on a service road, hidden by trees. Once containment protocols complete their cycle, this entire area will be swarming with response teams. They'll secure the site and create some plausible cover story about the dam collapse. As they reached the vehicle, Remy stopped short. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me exactly what's happening. What was my uncle researching? What's this anomaly you keep mentioning? And why did he want me to find this place now?" Sonny regarded him for a long moment, then sighed. "Get in the car. I'll explain what I can while we drive to somewhere secure." Once they were moving down the service road that wound around the back of Remy's property, Sonny began his explanation. The anomalies we monitor are essentially weak points in space-time, places where the boundaries between our reality and others become thin. These sites exhibit unusual properties: electromagnetic fluctuations, gravitational inconsistencies, occasionally even temporal distortions. The repository system was created to study artifacts and materials associated with these phenomena, both those that occur naturally and those that result from, let's call them, incursions. Incursions? Remy questioned, his mind struggling to accept what he was hearing. Instances where something crosses over from elsewhere, Sonny said matter-of-factly. Sometimes objects, sometimes energy patterns, occasionally entities. The containment dams, there are 3 across the country, were designed to stabilize these weak points, making incursions less likely while also providing a convenient cover operation. They turned onto a logging road, moving deeper into the forest that bordered Remy's vineyard. Through the trees, he could see more vehicles arriving at his property, including what looked like military transport trucks with no markings. Your uncle's research focused on utilizing these anomalies as potential energy sources, Sonny continued. He theorized that they could be safely tapped to provide unlimited clean energy. By the late 80s, he was close to a breakthrough, but there were concerns about his approach. The program directors felt the risks were too great, so they shut down his research and reduced his role to simple monitoring. Sonny navigated the winding forest road with practiced ease, eventually pulling into a small clearing containing a cabin that looked like a hunter's weekend retreat. He parked behind it, concealing the vehicle from the main road. "This is one of our safe houses," he explained as they exited the SUV. "We should be secure here while we figure out our next steps." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well appointed, with modern communication equipment disguised as ordinary fixtures. Sonny moved to a cabinet, removed a false back, and retrieved a leather-bound journal which he handed to Remy. "Your uncle left this for you. He updated it regularly until his death, documenting both his official research and his unauthorized, continued work." Remy took the journal with trembling hands. "Why now? Why would the coin work now when the dam collapsed?" "The containment structures were designed with fail-safes," Sonny explained, activating various security systems around the cabin. If they ever failed catastrophically, the repositories would unlock for authorized personnel, which, it seems, your uncle made sure would include you. He must have modified the recognition systems to accept his personal token. But why? Why? Would he want me to find all this? Sonny's expression grew serious. "Because something's happening, Remy. The anomalies are growing stronger worldwide. The containment measures are failing systematically, not just here. Your uncle predicted this decades ago, but no one listened. In his final years, he developed a contingency plan, one that would activate when the systems began to fail." He gestured to the journal. "Everything you need to understand is in there, including what he hoped you would do with the knowledge you gained today. But I should warn you, once you read it, there's no going back to your old life. The people who run the repository system won't stop looking for you, and they won't be as friendly as I am." Remy stared at the journal, the weight of his uncle's legacy suddenly feeling very real. "You said the dam was built to contain this anomaly. Now that it's collapsed, the anomaly is no longer fully suppressed," Sonny confirmed. "And if your uncle's calculations were correct, that means we don't have much time before the incursions begin again, on a scale we haven't seen since the 1950s. Outside, the day was fading into evening, but an unusual amber light seemed to be emanating from the direction of Remy's vineyard, the same color as the symbols in the repository. Whatever had been contained beneath his property for decades was awakening, and somehow his uncle had prepared him to face it. As night fell over the forest, Remy sat at the cabin's small dining table, his uncle's journal open before him. The leather-bound book was filled with meticulous handwriting, diagrams, equations, and observations spanning decades. Sonny had stepped outside to monitor communications and evaluate the situation at the vineyard, giving Remy privacy to absorb the astonishing revelations contained in these pages. The journal began in 1974, with his uncle's first observations of the anomaly. The early entries were formal, scientific, clearly written by a man accustomed to detailed research documentation. But as the years progressed, the tone changed, becoming more personal and urgent. One entry from 1986 caught Remy's attention. The Oversight Committee continues to ignore my warnings. The anomalies aren't simply thin spots between dimensions, they're growing. Whatever exists on the other side is pressing against our reality with increasing force. The containment measures we've implemented are temporary at best. I've run the calculations repeatedly. Within 30–40 years, all containment systems will fail simultaneously. When that happens, the barriers between dimensions will collapse entirely. Remy turned the page to find detailed sketches of the irrigation dam's construction, showing how it had been engineered not just to hold water but to create a specific electromagnetic field that would stabilize the anomaly beneath. Notes in the margins explained how the water itself served as both conductor and insulator for the specialized equipment buried within the dam's structure. A later entry from 1995 was even more troubling. They've restricted my access to the repository after discovering my unauthorized experiments. Short-sighted fools. The artifacts we've collected aren't just curiosities. They're tools, technologies from realities where physics evolve differently. I've been able to reverse engineer several components and believe I've developed a method to not just contain the anomalies, but to permanently seal them. But it would require coordinated action at all 12 sites, and they'll never approve such a plan after classifying my research as dangerously experimental. The most recent entries were from just months before his uncle's death, and these were addressed directly to Remy. To my nephew, if you're reading this, then the dam has failed as I predicted, and Sonny has found you. I know you must have questions, why I never told you the truth, why I left you the vineyard knowing what lay beneath it, why I chose you for this burden. The simple answer is, there was no one else I could trust with this responsibility. When I realized the government would never act on my warnings, I began making preparations of my own. Within the repository, I secreted the components needed to construct a sealing device based on my research. The challenge coin I left you is more than a key. It's also a storage device containing all my research data and the technical specifications for the device. Sonny was the only one in the program who believed my predictions. He's been helping me prepare for this day. Trust him, but verify everything yourself. You have the mind for this, Remy. Your engineering background, your attention to detail, your ability to solve complex problems. These aren't coincidences. I encourage these traits in you from a young age, knowing what you might one day face. There is little time once the containment fails. You have approximately 1 week before the anomaly expands beyond the possibility of sealing. Look for the case marked contingency in section F of the repository. It contains everything you need. The final pages contain detailed instructions for accessing a hidden section of the repository not on any official blueprints, along with complex schematics for what his uncle called a resonance anchor, the device that could supposedly seal the anomalies permanently. As Remy processed this information, the cabin's lights flickered momentarily. Outside, he heard Sonny curse, followed by hurried footsteps. The door burst open, and Sonny rushed in, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, moving to a window and peering out through the blinds. "The anomaly is destabilizing faster than expected. Take a look." Remy joined him at the window. In the distance, beyond the trees in the direction of his vineyard, the night sky glowed with an unnatural amber light, the same color as the symbols in the repository. Streaks of energy occasionally shot upward, like reverse lightning connecting earth to sky. "What are we seeing?" Remy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The beginning of an incursion event," Sonny replied. "The largest I've ever witnessed. The containment teams on site are scrambling, but they're not prepared for something of this magnitude." Through binoculars, Sonny surveyed the distant scene. They've established a perimeter around the property, but their equipment is already malfunctioning. Standard containment protocols won't work on something this size. He handed the binoculars to Remy, who focused them on his vineyard in the distance. The sight made his blood run cold. The entire north section of his property was bathed in pulsating amber light. At the center, where the dam had stood, a column of energy now rose into the sky. Surrounding it, figures in hazmat suits and military-style tactical gear were setting up equipment. But as he watched, one of their vehicles suddenly lifted off the ground, hovering momentarily before being flung aside like a toy. "Did you find what you needed in the journal?" Sonny asked urgently. Remy nodded, turning away from the window. "My uncle developed a way to seal the anomalies permanently. He hid the components and plans in the repository. There's a hidden section not on the official blueprints, and a case marked contingency that contains everything we need." "That explains a lot," Sonny muttered. In his final years, Robert made several unauthorized visits to the repository. Security logs showed him entering, but his activities inside weren't fully monitored due to his former clearance level. Another flash of light drew their attention back to the vineyard. The energy column had grown larger, and now objects, debris, equipment, even vehicles, were being pulled toward it in a slow, inexorable spiral. "We need to get back in there," Remy said, gathering the journal and moving toward the door. Sonny blocked his path. "That's suicide right now. The main entrance is compromised, and the site is crawling with security personnel. Even the emergency exit we used will be monitored. Then how do we reach this hidden section? My uncle said we only have about a week before the anomaly expands beyond the possibility of sealing." Sonny's expression was grim. "Based on what we're seeing, we may have much less time than that. The calculations in your uncle's journal must have been based on a gradual failure of the containment system, not a catastrophic collapse like what happened with the dam." He moved to a hidden panel in the wall and retrieved what looked like satellite maps of the area surrounding Remy's vineyard. There might be another way in. Robert mentioned other access points that were created during initial construction, then sealed and removed from official records. One of them might still be viable. As they studied the maps, the cabin's lights flickered again, then died completely. The communication equipment emitted a high-pitched squeal before going silent. Outside, the amber glow had intensified, now bright enough to cast shadows through the windows. "We're out of time," Sonny said, grabbing emergency packs from a storage locker. "That equipment failure means the anomaly's electromagnetic effects are expanding. Soon vehicles won't work either." He handed Remy a pack and what appeared to be a modified compass. "This device was designed by your uncle to function near anomalies. It doesn't point north. It points to the strongest nearby dimensional thinning. We can use it to locate another entrance." As they prepared to leave the cabin, Remy noticed something odd through the window. The forest around them had gone completely silent. No insects, no nocturnal birds, no rustle of animals moving through underbrush. Then he saw why. About 50 yards from the cabin, hanging suspended between two trees, was what looked like a tear in the very fabric of reality. A jagged, vertical split in the air itself, edges glowing with that same amber light. And through, it just barely visible, was a landscape that definitely wasn't the Oregon forest. "Sonny!" he called, pointing. The older man swore under his breath. "Small incursions are starting already. We need to move, now." Remy and Sonny moved swiftly through the darkened forest, guided only by the eerie amber glow emanating from the direction of the vineyard and the strange compass-like device that supposedly led toward dimensional thinning. The night had become unnaturally still, with occasional gusts of wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Stay close," Sonny warned as they navigated between the trees. "The effects will get stranger the closer we get to the anomaly. If you see anything unusual, anything at all, don't approach it. Some incursions are harmless spatial distortions, but others contain, well, let's just say, not everything that comes through is friendly." The modified compass led them on a winding path through the forest, occasionally changing direction as if responding to unseen forces. Remy noticed that their route seemed to be taking them in a wide arc around his vineyard, approaching it from the eastern boundary rather than directly from the north where they'd started. "Your uncle's notes mentioned a maintenance tunnel that was created during initial construction," Sonny explained as they walked. "It was used to bring in specialized equipment too sensitive to transport through the main entrance. After construction was complete, it was supposedly sealed and erased from official blueprints." "But my uncle knew about it?" "Robert had a photographic memory and was involved in the design phase. If anyone would remember an unofficial entrance, it would be him." As they crested a small ridge that overlooked the eastern edge of the vineyard, they paused to assess the situation. The scene below was chaos. Military-style vehicles formed a perimeter around the property, their headlights creating stark beams. Through the smoke-like amber haze that hung in the air, figures in protective gear moved with urgent purpose, setting up equipment that sparked and malfunctioned almost immediately. At the center of it all, where the irrigation dam had once stood, a swirling vortex of energy rose into the night sky. It pulsed with increasing intensity, sending out waves of force that visibly distorted the air around it. With each pulse, objects within a certain radius, fallen trees, rocks, equipment, would momentarily lift off the ground before settling again. "The anomaly is feeding on the energy they're using to contain it," Sonny observed grimly. "Every device they activate just makes it stronger." They continued eastward, staying hidden in the tree line until the compass began spinning wildly. Sonny stopped, examining the device carefully. "We're close," he whispered, scanning the area. "The entrance should be somewhere within 50 yards of this position." The forest floor here was thick with undergrowth, making it difficult to identify any man-made structures. Remy moved methodically, pushing aside ferns and vines, looking for anything unnatural in the landscape. Then he noticed something.
Section of the forest floor that seemed slightly different in texture, with planes that didn't quite match the surrounding vegetation.
"Over here," he called softly. Together they cleared away the undergrowth to reveal a concrete slab, approximately 6 feet square, covered in decades of soil and plant growth. In the center was what appeared to be a standard utility cover, the kind used for underground access to electrical or water systems. It might have looked ordinary to an untrained eye, but Remy noted subtle differences. The metal was thicker than standard utility covers, and the locking mechanism far more sophisticated. "This is it," Sonny confirmed, examining the markings. "Around the edge. Your uncle's handiwork, definitely. He designed a lot of the security systems for these facilities. Using tools from their emergency packs, they worked to clear decades of accumulated dirt from the access panel." As they did, Remy became aware of a strange sensation, a prickling along his skin, as if the very air around them was electrically charged. He looked up and froze, approximately 20 feet away, hovering just above the ground. was what appeared to be a sphere of rippling energy about the size of a beach ball. It pulsed with the same amber light as the larger anomaly at the vineyard, but seemed self-contained, almost like a bubble in reality itself. "Sonny," Remy whispered, not taking his eyes off the phenomenon. 2 o'clock, just past that fallen log." Sonny glanced up briefly, then returned to his work with greater urgency. "Small incursion point. Don't stare at it too long. These smaller manifestations tend to be unstable, but they're not immediately dangerous unless disturbed." As if responding to their awareness, the sphere began to drift slowly in their direction. Inside its translucent surface, Remy could see what looked like microscopic lightning bolts, and at its center, a darkness that seemed to have depth beyond the sphere's physical size. "It's coming this way," he warned, backing toward the access. "Impanel, almost got it," Sonny replied, working the last of the locking mechanisms. "These access points were designed with electromagnetic shielding. Once we're inside, it shouldn't be able to follow." The sphere accelerated slightly, now only 15 feet away and closing. As it approached, Remy felt an inexplicable pull. Not physical but mental, as if the sphere was somehow attractive to his consciousness itself. He found himself wanting to reach out and touch it, to see what would happen if he just— "Don't," Sonny snapped, grabbing his arm. "That's how they get you. The psychological pull is part of the incursion effect. It wants to be investigated." With a final twist of his specialized tools, Sonny released the access panel's locks. The heavy cover slid aside with surprising ease, revealing a vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in the concrete wall. The shaft glowed with dim emergency lighting that flickered intermittently. "In, now!" Sonny ordered, practically pushing Remy toward the opening. Remy descended the ladder rapidly, the cool, recycled air of the facility a stark contrast to the electrically charged atmosphere above. Sonny followed immediately, pausing, only to slide the cover back into place and engage an interior locking mechanism. Just before the panel closed, Remy caught a glimpse of the energy sphere hovering directly above the opening, pulsing with what almost seemed like curiosity. The access shaft extended about 30 feet down before opening into a narrow maintenance tunnel. Unlike the main sections of the repository with their ambient lighting and strange symbols, this passage was utilitarian: plain concrete walls, basic electrical conduits running along the ceiling, and simple numbered markers at regular intervals. "We're in the maintenance level," Sonny explained, consulting a small device that displayed what appeared to be a partial schematic of the facility. "It runs beneath the main repository floor, providing access to power systems and structural supports. How do we get to the main level from here?" "There should be access points at regular intervals. We need to find one that won't trigger security alerts when used." He studied the schematic more carefully. "Your uncle marked one such access point. It's about a quarter-mile in that direction." As they moved through the narrow tunnel, Remy noticed subtle changes in the environment. The emergency lighting fluctuated in intensity, sometimes brightening, sometimes dimming to near darkness. The air grew cooler, with occasional warm currents that defied normal air circulation patterns. Most concerning were the faint amber glows that sometimes appeared in the concrete walls themselves, as if the material had become partially translucent, revealing energy patterns moving within the solid surfaces. "The anomaly's effects are penetrating even down here," Sonny observed grimly. "The containment systems must be failing throughout the facility." They passed junction points where other tunnels branched off, each marked with coded designations. That meant nothing to Remy. Sonny navigated confidently, checking his schematic at each intersection. "Your uncle's notes mentioned that the repository was built with multiple redundant systems," Sonny explained as they walked. "Even if the main power grid failed, even if the primary containment measures collapsed, there were backup systems designed to activate automatically. So why aren't they working? Because what's happening now isn't a simple system failure. The anomaly itself has changed, evolved, in a sense. It's as if it's becoming more intelligent, more purposeful in its effects. They reached a service ladder that led upward to what appeared to be another access hatch. Unlike the entrance they'd used, this one had no external locking mechanism. It was designed to be opened only from below. This should put us in section F of the main repository level, Sonny said, checking his schematic one last time. Assuming the internal layout hasn't been compromised by the anomaly's effects, and if it has, Sonny's expression was grim, then we'll be navigating blind through a facility experiencing dimensional instability, in which case, stay close, touch. Nothing you don't absolutely have to, and if you see anything that looks like it doesn't belong in our reality, run. He began climbing the ladder, with Remy close behind. As they ascended, the ambient sounds changed. The distant mechanical hum that had pervaded the maintenance tunnel was replaced by the now familiar musical resonance Remy had experienced during his first visit to the repository. But this time, the sound seemed distorted, with discordant notes. Breaking through the harmonious pattern, Sonny reached the hatch and carefully pushed it open, peering through before signaling that it was safe to proceed. They emerged into what should have been a storage section of the repository, but what greeted them was something far different from what Remy had seen earlier that day. The neat rows of shelving units remained, but many had been twisted into impossible shapes, as if the metal itself had been temporarily fluid before resolidifying. The artifacts in their containers glowed with internal energies, some pulsing in synchronized patterns, others erratically flashing in response to unseen stimuli. Most disturbing were the areas where reality itself seemed to be breaking down, patches of space where the air rippled like heat waves, through which glimpses of somewhere else could occasionally be seen. Section F, Sonny confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. But not as your uncle would have known it. We need to find that. Contingency case, and we need to find it fast. Stay close, Sonny whispered, as they moved cautiously between the distorted shelving units. According to your uncle's journal, the contingency case should be in the far corner of this section. The ambient light in the repository had changed. From the steady illumination, Remy remembered, to an unstable flickering that alternated between intense brightness and near darkness. With each fluctuation, the twisted metal frames and glowing artifacts cast bizarre, shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. They navigated using the locational grid marked on the floor, though many of the alphanumeric designations had become warped or illegible. Occasionally, they would encounter areas where the floor itself bulged upward or sank into impossible depressions, forcing them to detour around these spatial distortions. The journal mentioned F42 Omega, Remy said, straining to see the markings. In the unstable light, that should be the final storage unit in this row. As they approached the back corner of the section, a loud metallic groan echoed through the facility. Several shelving units ahead of them suddenly twisted further, metal bending like taffy before re-solidifying in new configurations. The artifacts stored there tumbled from their shelves, some containers breaking open upon impact with the floor. Don't touch anything that's been exposed, Sonny warned sharply. Uncontained artifacts are unpredictable in the best circumstances. In these conditions, he didn't need to finish the thought. As they watched, one broken container released what appeared to be ordinary sand, but as it spread across the floor, each grain began to glow and move independently, forming complex geometric patterns before scattering again. They carefully circumnavigated the affected area, finally reaching the F42 Omega designation. The storage unit there appeared remarkably intact compared to its surroundings, as if protected by some unseen force. Unlike the standard shelving, this was a large, reinforced cabinet with additional security measures beyond the conventional locks. "This is it," Sonny confirmed, examining the security panel. "Your uncle's personal storage. He had special authorization for this unit, supposedly for storing sensitive historical records related to the anomaly's discovery." The security panel required both a physical key and a 6-digit code. Sonny produced a key from a chain around his neck. "Robert gave me this years ago, for emergencies. Said I'd know when to use it." Remy consulted the journal, finding a sequence of numbers his uncle had subtly embedded within the text. "Try 748621, he suggested. The lock disengaged with a satisfying click. Inside the cabinet, arranged with meticulous care, were several items: a sealed metal case bearing the label Contingency, a collection of data storage devices, and a personal letter addressed to Remy in his uncle's handwriting. Without hesitation, Remy grabbed the contingency case and the letter, while Sonny collected the data devices. Just as they secured these items in their packs, another wave of distortion swept through the repository. This one was stronger than before, causing the floor beneath them to momentarily become transparent, revealing the maintenance level below as if the concrete had turned to glass. "We need to move," Sonny urged, his voice tight with controlled fear. "The anomaly is accelerating its effects. This entire section could become completely unstable at any moment." They started back toward the maintenance access hatch, but found their path blocked by what could only be described as a tear in reality, a vertical split in the air itself, similar to what they'd seen in the forest, but much larger. Through it, Remy caught glimpses of an alien landscape, red sand dunes under a purple sky with 2 small suns on the horizon. "Incursion point," Sonny muttered, backing away slowly. "Major one. We need another route." They turned to find an alternative path, only to discover more spatial distortions forming around them. Shelving units bent and twisted, the floor rippled like water, and patches of air shimmered with potential tiers ready to open into other dimensions. "This way," Remy said, spotting a relatively clear path between 2 rows of storage units. "If we can reach the main corridor, we might be able to—" He stopped short as a figure appeared at the end of the row. At first glance, it appeared human, a man in what looked like an old-fashioned suit from the 1950s. But as it moved toward them, the wrongness became apparent. Its movements were too fluid, as if it had more joints than a human body should possess. Its face, though human in general appearance, had features that shifted subtly with each step, never quite settling into a fixed arrangement. "Entity incursion," Sonny breathed, his hand moving to a weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "Don't make eye contact." The entity stopped about 20 feet away, tilting its head at an unnatural angle as it observed them. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," it said, the words oddly inflected, as if English was a language it had learned but never quite mastered. "The device, it was never meant for this reality." It took another step forward, and Remy saw that its shoes didn't quite touch the floor. It hovered a fraction of an inch above the surface. "Who are you?" Remy demanded, clutching the contingency case tighter. The entity's face shifted again, features rearranging into an approximation of a smile that never reached its 2 wide eyes. "I am Supervisor," it replied simply. "And you are interfering with the convergence." Sonny moved slightly in front of Remy, his hand still on his concealed weapon. "We need to go," he muttered under his breath. "These entities can manipulate perception. Don't listen to anything it says." The supervisor's face rippled again, features flowing like liquid, before settling into a new configuration that somehow resembled Remy's uncle. Not exactly his features, but an unsettling approximation. Dr. Blackwood understood the inevitability. Of convergence, it said, voice modulating to mimic an older man's tones. He studied our reality for decades. The barriers were never meant to be permanent. It took another hovering step forward. The anomalies are not flaws. They are corrections. The universe is seeking equilibrium. My uncle spent his life trying to seal the anomalies, Remy countered, fighting the strange, compelling quality of the entity's voice. The supervisor's approximation of a smile widened unnaturally. Is that what you believe? Did you never question why a brilliant physicist would abandon a prestigious career to live above an anomaly site? Don't engage with it, Sonny warned, eyeing a possible escape route between distorted shelving units. Your uncle didn't discover the anomaly by accident. He was drawn to it, called by it. The entity gestured toward the contingency case. That device isn't meant to seal anything. It's a key designed to stabilize the connection between our realities. Sonny fired a warning shot that passed through the supervisor without effect. Remy, run, now! They bolted through a narrow gap between twisted metal shelves as the entity's form dissolved into a swirling mass of amber light that pursued them. Artifacts fell from shelves as they passed, some exploding into fragments of light, others melting into impossible shapes. The maintenance hatch, Sonny shouted, pointing ahead where their original entry point was still visible. As they ran, Remy felt a strange sensation in his mind, like fingers rifling through his thoughts. The supervisor's voice echoed inside his head. Open the case. Remy, see what your uncle really created. They reached the hatch, Sonny yanking it open as the swirling light closed in. Go, go! Remy scrambled down the ladder, the contingency case clutched tightly under one arm. Sonny followed, pulling the hatch shut, just as tendrils of amber light reached for them. In the maintenance tunnel below, they could hear a rhythmic pounding as the entity attempted to follow. The metal hatch bulged inward with each impact, but held firm. The access points were designed to resist anomalous entities, Sonny explained, as they ran down the tunnel. That won't hold it for long, though. Was it telling the truth? Remy gasped as they ran. About my uncle? Entities lie, Sonny replied, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty. They manipulate. Whatever's in that case, your uncle meant for it to help humanity, not harm it. They reached the vertical shaft leading back to the forest, climbing rapidly toward the surface. Behind them, a distant boom echoed through the tunnels, the supervisor breaking through. We need to get somewhere I can examine this case safely, Remy said, as they emerged from the access point into the pre-dawn forest. And I need to read my uncle's letter. Sonny nodded grimly, scanning the horizon where the amber glow above the vineyard had intensified. We don't have much time left. The convergence is accelerating. Dawn was breaking as Remy and Sonny reached an abandoned fire lookout tower Sonny knew about, 3 miles from the vineyard. From this elevated position, they could see the anomaly had grown substantially. The amber column now towered hundreds of feet into the sky, with visible tiers in reality surrounding it like a halo. Military and scientific personnel had established a wider perimeter, evacuation helicopters ferrying people from the surrounding area. We don't have much time, Sonny said, setting up a battery-powered radio to monitor emergency channels. Whatever you're going to do with that case, it needs to happen soon. Remy placed the contingency case on a dusty table and carefully opened his uncle's letter. The paper was high quality, preserved perfectly inside its sealed envelope. His uncle's elegant handwriting filled the page. Remy, if you're reading this, then events have unfolded as I predicted. The containment system has failed, and the Willamette anomaly has begun to expand beyond control. I imagine you've already encountered entities from the other side, perhaps even the one that calls itself the supervisor. First, You must understand that everything I've done was to protect our world, though my methods and research have been wildly misinterpreted by both my government colleagues and the entities from beyond. The anomalies are not natural phenomena, as the supervisor claims. They are deliberate incursions, the first stage of an invasion from a reality that has depleted its own resources. The entities seek a convergence, a permanent merging of our dimensions that would essentially overwrite our reality with theirs. What you hold is indeed a key, but not one that opens doors, rather one that locks them permanently. The contingency device utilizes the same energy that powers the anomalies, but reconfigured to create a resonance pattern that will collapse all dimensional thinning points simultaneously. The supervisor and its kind have been manipulating humans for decades, drawing susceptible minds to the anomalies, using us to further their agenda. They convinced several of my colleagues that convergence was inevitable and beneficial. I played along to gain their trust while developing this countermeasure in secret. The device requires activation at the primary anomaly site, yes, directly at the heart of what's happening at the vineyard. Once activated, it will need approximately 5 minutes to calibrate before full deployment. During this time, the entities will do everything in their power to stop you. Sunny is trustworthy, one of the few who saw through their deceptions, but you must be the one to activate the device. The genetic lock responds only to Blackwood DNA, my final security measure, to prevent sabotage. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you and for keeping you in the dark all these years. I wanted you to have a normal life for as long as possible. The world will never know what you've done, but know that I've always been proud of you and that I trust you completely with this responsibility. Your loving uncle, Robert. Remy looked up from the letter to find Sunny watching him intently. Well? The older man asked. It's a dimensional sealing device, Remy confirmed, and we need to take it directly into the heart of the anomaly. Sunny nodded grimly. I was afraid of that. The perimeter is heavily guarded, and the anomaly's effects make it nearly impossible to approach the center without protection. According to this, we have no choice, Remy said, opening the contingency case to reveal a device unlike anything he'd ever seen. A complex arrangement of components that seemed to shift and change when not viewed directly, surrounding a central, cylindrical core that pulsed with contained energy. How soon can we move? He asked, studying the activation mechanism that featured what appeared to be a DNA scanner. First light is breaking now, Sunny replied, checking his watch. That gives us the advantage of visibility, but also makes us easier to spot. We should... He stopped abruptly as the radio crackled with an emergency broadcast. All units be advised. Multiple anomaly sites reporting critical containment failures nationwide. Repeat, this is not an isolated incident. All sites are going critical simultaneously. They exchanged alarmed glances. The convergence had begun. The journey back to the vineyard was surreal. As Remy and Sunny made their way through the forest, reality itself seemed to be unraveling around them. Trees occasionally phased in and out of existence. Patches of ground rippled like water. The sky above had taken on a strange, mottled appearance. Sections of normal dawn blue interrupted by expanding windows of alien purple where the other dimension leaked through. The military has established a 3-mile exclusion zone, Sunny explained as they crouched behind a ridge overlooking the property. But they're focusing on evacuation now. Most of their equipment has failed inside the 2-mile radius. Through binoculars, Remy studied the scene. The vineyard was barely recognizable. Where rows of carefully tended Pinot Noir grapes had once stretched across gentle slopes, now existed a landscape in flux. The ground pulsed with amber light, and floating islands of earth hovered at various heights. At the center, where the irrigation dam had collapsed, The vortex had expanded into a swirling maelstrom at least 100 yards across. Most disturbing were the figures moving through this chaos. Not human soldiers or scientists, but more entities. Like the supervisor, they glided across the shifting terrain with unnatural grace, seemingly unaffected by the gravitational anomalies plaguing the area. "There are dozens of them," Remy whispered, lowering the binoculars. "How are we supposed to get past them?" Sonny unzipped his pack and removed what looked like 2 modified hazmat suits. "Your uncle developed these prototype shields years ago. They're designed to protect against anomalous effects and mask our presence from the entity's perception. They were never mass-produced because they require a power source most people don't have access to." He held up a small amber crystal that looked unsettlingly similar to the energy at the heart of the anomaly. A stable fragment from an early incursion. Robert managed to isolate and neutralize it. Each suit has one embedded in its power system. They quickly donned the suits, which were lighter than they appeared. Immediately, Remy felt a difference. The disorienting effects of the reality distortions diminished, and the ambient noise of the anomaly faded to a tolerable level. "The suits will buy us some invisibility, but not immunity," Sonny warned. "Direct contact with an entity or the anomaly's core will still be dangerous." Remy secured the contingency device to his back. According to his uncle's notes, it would need to be placed at the exact center of the vortex to properly align its dimensional frequencies. "Once I activate it, how long do we have to get clear?" he asked. According to Robert's calculations, approximately 5 minutes between initial activation and full deployment. During that time, the device will become increasingly visible to the entities as it draws power from the anomaly itself. When they realize what it is, they'll throw everything they have at stopping it, Remy finished. Sonny nodded grimly. "I'll create a diversion on the eastern perimeter. That should draw enough of them away to give you a clear path to the center." "And if I don't make it back out?" Sonny placed a hand on Remy's shoulder. "Your uncle believed some sacrifices are worth making, but he also believed in you, your resourcefulness, your determination. So do I." They synchronized their watches and reviewed the approach route one final time. The path would take Remy through what had once been his prized Pinot Noir blocks, now a twisted landscape of floating earth and intersecting realities. "Good luck," Sonny said, preparing to move toward his diversion point. "When this is over, I'll buy you the best bottle of wine in Oregon." Remy managed a tense smile. "I think after this, I might switch to growing something less complicated, maybe blueberries." With that, they separated, each moving toward their designated positions, as the fabric of reality continued to unravel around them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.